Welcome. Thank you so much for joining the World Affairs Council of Connecticut, the Jewish Federation of Greater Hartford, and the Consulate General of Israel in New England to discuss the state of Israel and answer the question, with a new government, is this a new era? We are thrilled today to have with us Ambassador Meron Reuben, Consul General of Israel to New England. Ambassador Reuben served as the Consul General since November of 2020. He has a diplomatic career spanning over 3 decades, including roles at the Israeli embassies in Chile, Mexico, and as ambassador to Paraguay, Bolivia, and Colombia. Ambassador Reuben also served as Israel's ambassador to the UN and as Israel's chief of state protocol. So Ambassador, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Amanda. It really is a pleasure to be with you and with the World Affairs Council of Connecticut, and in conjunction with the Jewish Federation, of course, of Greater Hartford. And I look forward to trying to answer some of your questions, though, you know, we're barely 2 weeks into a new government, and I'm trying to fathom things out just the way you are.
Excellent. It's a great time, and I know there's a lot of unanswered questions ahead of us. So we're so grateful to have you with us today. So today's structure will kick off with a conversation with Ambassador Meron Reuben, Consul General of Israel to New England, and Megan Torrey, CEO of the World Affairs Council of Connecticut. So now let's get started. I'm pleased to turn it over to you, Megan. Megan Torrey, CEO of the World Affairs Council.
Thank you, Amanda, and welcome everybody. A reminder that we have collected a lot of questions ahead of time, hopefully trying to crowdsource as many as possible. And so if you also have questions, please add it to the Q&A. But Ambassador Reuben, are you ready to get started?
Yes, with pleasure.
Excellent. So we're here today to talk about the new government, which has been described as one of the most diverse in history. Can you talk to us a little bit about this coalition? What are the components? What is the makeup of this new government?
Well, I think you are correct in saying that it is a very, very diverse coalition. It's a coalition made up of 8 distinct parties. From what is classified or called in Israel the far right, or the right-wing parties, through center parties, through left-wing parties, and the Deputy Minister of Arab Affairs in the Prime Minister's office is a member of the Ram Party, which is the southern wing of the Islamic Party of Israel. So yes, in that sense, it is a very interesting group of both parties and ideologies that have come together to rule with what I would only describe as a razor-thin majority. And we'll see how they do. Of course, when the government was signed in or was voted in, it was voted in on the slimmest margins possible of 1 vote, as you know, 60 in favor and 59 against, but 1 abstention. So I don't think you can get much smaller a margin. And it might be quite difficult to run this kind of coalition, though. As both Naftali Bennett, the new Prime Minister, and Yair Lapid, the alternate Prime Minister and new Foreign Minister, have said, it will be based on collaboration, cooperation, and mutual understanding. And I think that as far as I understand, they are most probably going to deal with the nitty-gritty of running a country first, and then maybe putting a bit of ideology on the back burner so that things can move forward. Though, of course, that doesn't always is not always possible. Now, you know, this mix, and of course also the amount of women in the government is also relatively high for Israel, not in comparison to some of the European countries, but some 1/3 of the ministers are women. We even have you know, the members of Knesset as well. You have Karine El-Harar, and she actually has a muscle dystrophy. and sits in a wheelchair, as well as other members who are definitely interesting. And we have the first Israel's first a deaf member of parliament, and she's the fifth deaf member of parliament in the world, actually, and she's a member of Naftali Bennett's party, and it was very, very emotional, I think, to see her take the oath of office using sign language. This is something that is definitely, it is what I would say an inclusive government. And I think that this is something that's very, very new for Israelis, and we're all trying to begin to understand what's going on.
So not only in makeup, but in groundbreaking individuals. So that's an exciting new development in Israel. Many have pointed out, though, that with this diverse government and elected on such a slim margin, that it may have elements of fragility in it. Do you see that there could be potentials for fragility within that government, and what can be done to sort of protect this new coalition?
Well, I definitely think it's a fragile government, but it's not the first government that has been voted in on such a small margin, and there were even governments who were minority governments and didn't even have the 60+ members of Knesset, but were dependent on parties that were outside of the coalition. Whereas this time, all the parties are within the coalition. So yes, as you mentioned, Megan, we do have a very fragile government, but maybe its strength is in its fragility, because everybody realizes that if something goes wrong, then the government may collapse. And so because they're not at this moment interested in the collapse of the government, I think you will see a lot of jostling to keep the government on track and going ahead without rocking the boat too much. Though, as you mentioned, yes, there are definitely difficult questions that will be raised, and sometimes one doesn't always choose the questions that are raised, because sometimes external factors come in and will change the course of your government as well. Which is also very interesting. But I think also in this government, we're seeing a sort of a generational change. And this is something that is very interesting and very, very difficult when it comes to how to run a government. First and foremost, the outgoing Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu, was 71 years old, and Naftali Bennett is 49. There is that generational change as well, and actually Bennett himself used to work for Netanyahu. So yes, it is quite interesting to see how we're seeing this generational change. Though knowing our previous Prime Minister, I don't think anybody will count him out of the race in the future.
So actually talk to us about the new Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett. We know that he is in a power sharing agreement, I think will serve for a 2-year term. Can you contrast him with your former Prime Minister, Netanyahu? Because of course, after 12 years or over 12 years, having a leader at the top is a big change.
Well, of course it is. If any leadership that you are in for 12 years straight, allows you the ability that most freshmen don't have. I think that if anybody sits in any post for 12 years, you will actually deal with it and be very good in it. So yes, Prime Minister Netanyahu is definitely a political expert, and he has been involved in politics for nearly 40 years. Serving from the United Nations, the embassy in Washington, etc., and being deputy foreign minister, then foreign minister, etc. and Prime Minister the last 12 years, and prior to that as well, between 96 and 99. So, but Naftali Bennett and him, in a certain way, do sort of come from the right of the political map. I think both had, Naftali Bennett actually is slightly different in the fact that his parents are immigrants from the United States. And he himself was born in Haifa. Both of them served in special forces units, both Naftali Bennett and Prime Minister Netanyahu. So it is a very elite sort of units that they come from, commanding, combat operations and etc. Whereas our previous Prime Minister then went into business. I think Naftali Bennett, of course, also went into business. He went more into the high-tech business, creating sort of a co-owned U.S. company that was then sold for a very nice sum of money, some $150 million. That's where he has his pocket money from. So yes, once that was sold, I think it was in 2005, he then sort of began focus himself more on the political sphere, joining Netanyahu and then starting his own party in 2008. So it's not as if he's very, very new on the political scene, because he also served as the Minister of Diaspora Affairs or Jewish Affairs. He served as the Minister of Education. He served as the Minister of Defense. So it's not that he's coming totally new into the field of politics. So yes, we definitely see that he does come with a background and an understanding, and the fact that he is focused, and I think that it'll be very interesting to see. If you're classifying it according to the parties, he's Israel's most right wing of prime ministers, and the first prime minister to actually wear a kippah or a yarmulke on his head. So yes, it's actually a very interesting leadership, and of course his collaboration with Yair Lapid, who is actually the largest party in his coalition, because Bennett only has a party of 7 seats, whereas Yair Lapid has a party of 17 seats, is something that is very, very interesting. You've seen a lot of politicians here take a sidestep, shall I say, in their necessity to either lead the coalition. I mean, one would have expected that maybe Yair Lapid would have been the first choice for prime minister, but I think he realized that he wouldn't be able to form a government without including Naftali Bennett, and so by including him and offering him the post of prime minister, at least for the first two and a half years of the coalition, he allowed, or he brought about the change of government for the first time in 12 years, yes.
So let's zoom out a little bit to the region more broadly. So he's not the only new leader in the region. So he's been in 2 weeks, Naftali Bennett, but over the weekend, we saw Ibrahim Raisi become the leader, the president in Iran. Is there any indication that how these two leaders might engage, not engage, what the Israeli-Iranian relationship might look like going forward? And this is a relationship that maybe contentious is a polite word.
Well, the last time Iranian and Israeli leaderships engaged was in 1979, when we did have actually an embassy in Tehran. But the advent of the Islamic Republic of Iran brought about the collapse of the relationship between the two countries, and brought about the animosity, I would say, over the decades between the two countries. I don't think we're very ecstatic. I don't think anybody's ecstatic about Ibrahim Raisi being becoming Iran's new president. He will take office in August, if I'm not mistaken. He's, I think, the hardest hardliner of the group who were running. You can't really, there aren't really free and fair elections in Iran, and I think it goes to show that the clergy in Iran decides who will run for president, and it's not a free and open election. So we have a hardliner who was also head of the High Court, and if you ask any human rights group, they will also tell you that he has been involved in the deaths of thousands of Iranians over the decades. And unfortunately, he will now most probably be the Iranian president as of August. I can't see any direct connections between them, not between Bennett and Raisi. But we live in a rather problematic region. We don't always choose our neighbors, and some of our neighbors are not particularly friendly. So yes, we do have a very basic problem that I don't think the Iranian problem is going to go away. And Iran, as you know, is very interested in seeing Israel wiped off the map. And we will most probably have to continue to deal with it. And especially when it comes to the Iranian nuclear program, which we have been wary of for many years.
I have a question from the audience, from Melanie. So let's stay in the region for a second. Can you talk about the new coalition and maybe their view on the Abraham Accords? And, are they going to hold? Does it have a future? What does that mean for relations in the region?
We both the previous government and the new government sees the Abraham Accords as an important cornerstone of any future Israeli collaboration with the Middle East and Africa. As you know, 4 agreements were signed last year between the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. Thanks to the help with the United States. I think the new administration in Washington as of January has also focused in on those accords and sees them as very favorable, and I think definitely a game changer in the Middle East. And I think that both the Biden administration and the Bennett government would very much like to see a strengthening of these accords, and maybe even finding ways to sign more accords with more governments, either in the Middle East and or in North Africa, especially if they are Muslim majority governments. Yes, I definitely think that this is a cornerstone and won't disappear. It is very, very important and very, very fundamental. Our new Minister of International Cooperation, who actually comes from the left-wing Meretz party, is Isawi Frej, is also a Druze member of parliament, and definitely would be very important to continue in that vein of collaboration and cooperation throughout the Middle East.
So I want to bring in another audience question from Byron now about the U.S. domestic opinion and the bilateral relationship. So here in the U.S., especially sort of over the last several months, as there had been a hot conflict, or there is a hot conflict going on in Israel, many have pointed to a change in United States public opinion towards U.S. foreign policy, the U.S. foreign policy position towards Israel. How do you see this impacting the longer-term bilateral relationship between the United States and Israel?
Well, in general, there has been a slight shift. I wouldn't say there's been a shift in the policy coming out of Washington. I would say more there's been a shift in the policies coming out of some of the members of the Democratic Party. which is having its effect as well. I must admit that I am relatively new to the region and relatively new to American politics, but I find it rather perturbing that some politicians will actually accept or see some of the viewpoints of a terrorist organization and accept that propaganda hook, line, and sinker, as they say, without really checking the facts and what goes on on the ground. I definitely think that this is something that has to be discussed and dealt with. I definitely think that we have a lot of explaining to do, and this has to come first and foremost, of course, between ourselves and our friends. I have never seen Israel as a partisan problem. I definitely think that the Israeli-United States relationship is definitely a bipartisan relationship. Israel has been a steadfast ally of the United States, and we see the United States as our most steadfast ally in the world. And I think that this is something that hasn't changed between the administrations. But as some people in the new administration have said, a lot of things go on behind closed doors instead of having the relationship spoken out or spoken about in the open. And I think that this is something that is very important, that this continues. And we have seen already quite a few members of Israel's previous government and even the new government in contact with members of the administration in Washington, and definitely seen a lot of collaboration and cooperation that continues, and we hope will continue not only for the foreseeable future, but for the long-term future.
So I want to bring in a business question from Mark, who has a question about foreign direct investment into Israel. And we know that even here in Connecticut, we have foreign direct investment from Israel, most notably a hydroponics company. So given the hot conflict in Israel, have you seen any impact on FDI in the short term? And are you anticipating any issues with FDI in the longer term?
I haven't seen the exact numbers on that, but there has been a slight drop, as there have been in most countries around the world when it comes to foreign investment, because countries and governments have been focusing in on themselves and on dealing with, of course, how to deal with coronavirus. And it is taking its toll on investments, but I think that we will be able to bounce back as much as possible. We'd very much like to see a flourishing of a relationship, especially with Connecticut. We definitely hope that Governor Lamont's visit that was planned for 2019 will be back on the agenda in the not too distant future. As well as, of course, maybe setting up a commercial office that will deal with Connecticut and Israeli relations. This is something that is definitely high on my agenda as Consul General to New England. But at the moment, the Israeli economy is still, even with the high cost of dealing with coronavirus, seems to be one of those economies that is fast coming out of the doldrums. And let's hope that this will continue for the benefit both of the citizens of Israel and the citizens of the United States.
I want to bring in a question from Beverly about water and water resources. So hearing about, can you tell us about Israel's settlements at water well sites, specifically in the West Bank, and how do you think the new coalition government views water sources as a concern? Again, from Beverly.
Oh, I thought you were going to focus in on the fact that Israel is a world leader in water resources. Yes, well, there's a whole long history of of how things have been developed and how water, unfortunately, has become a politicized point, especially in our relationships between ourselves and the Palestinian Authority. In my relatively long history in the foreign ministry, remember quite a few incidences where, unfortunately, water was used as a political ploy. I myself remember the fact that we offered the Palestinians cubic meters of water for every cubic meter of sewage that we received from them, and this was also poo-pooed, what shall I say, by the Palestinian side, and they said we're not giving you that ability to help us take away our sewage water and give us clean water. So yes, there is a lot of problems, but a lot of those things are tackled behind the scenes because it is in the end something that has to do with the importance of life and the quality of water used by everybody. And so yeah, we do sit on joint water aquifers. And these are things that have to be dealt with, and I think are dealt with between the two sides.
Well, let's stick on the issue of water for just 1 second. And my question would be about the longer term impacts of climate change on the geography of Israel, as we all experience sea level rise. And we know that geographically speaking, it is a smaller strip of land. How is Israel looking at the future, the impact of climate change?
Well, we're very, very focused on climate change, but when it comes to water, we also have 5 of the world's largest desalination plants along our coast. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, some 50% of our drinking water comes from desalination, which means that maybe those who have said in the past that the future wars will be fought about water are not actually correct, because in the end it is the technology that you need, because we still have quite a lot of water in our seas. So yes, Israel is definitely focused in on climate change. We understand the necessity to deal with it. We are definitely looking at different ways to focus in and to bring about a better life for all those who live in the region, and improve the quality of the environment in which we live. Israel is also going over to natural gas as opposed to coal, and we are also looking at different sustainable energies, whether they be wind power or other. We don't have too many high waves like you have in the United States, but definitely looking into other ways. And of course, drip irrigation, which has always been a mainstay in Israel for some 50 years already, as well as, of course, focusing in on other high technologies and doing away with gas at the pump, and focusing in on maybe electric cars. And we, like other countries in North America and in Europe, are definitely focusing in on changing the way we use our electric focus, and the way we focus in on other energy resources. Yes.
We are almost out of time, but I have 2 questions for you. The first one I want to bring in from the audience, and it may be a quick answer. Will Israel open to individual tourists on July 1st?
I do not think that we will open to individual tourists on July the 1st. There has been a rumor. We are slightly worried. There have been 2 cases in schools whereby the Indian variant seems to have spread amongst school children who have not been vaccinated. We are now looking into vaccinating school children from 12 and up. But of course, as you know, we're also going into summer holidays, so it makes it a little more difficult to vaccinate everybody. We would very much like to see it. At the moment, it's only family members can come into Israel if they have foreign passports. We must try and remind everybody that we're still in a pandemic around the world, and that it's not always so easy to travel, and that we are looking after our civilians and doing our utmost also to vaccinate those around us, though not everybody is cooperating.
So Sean, you may have to wait a little bit longer to travel to Israel, but don't worry, you'll get there at some point soon. So Ambassador, as we close, and as we're looking at this new government, what do you want us to know as we go through the next few weeks and months and in years?
Well, first and foremost, as happens with all new things, I think there will be a trial period. I think people must see at how the government reacts to different pressures put upon it, to different focuses, what they are doing. I think the first government meeting that took place on Sunday, yesterday, might have been a very interesting pointer as to where the government is taking us. There were definitely a lot of things on the agenda that were discussed, and a lot of things that were voted on. And I think that this is something that is very, very important to look for in the new government. And usually there is a honeymoon period. I'm not so sure that this government is going to get that honeymoon period, but they are definitely hoping to stick it out for the long run, and we'll have to see. But as I mentioned in the very beginning, it is a very fragile coalition, but hoping that this fragility will also be its strength.
Ambassador Reuben, thank you so much for joining us today on State of the World.
Thank you very much.
And Ambassador Reuben, to echo Megan, thank you again for speaking with us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone for joining us. And a special thank you to today's event partners, the Jewish Federation of Greater Hartford, and to the Consulate General of Israel in New England. So once again, thank you so much, Ambassador Reuben, for this important briefing on Israel's new government and addressing all of our audience questions. I know the majority, if not all of the questions today, were crowdsourced from our community. And we so appreciate you taking the time to address each and every one of them. So thank you. Thank you everyone for your questions. Thank you for joining us today, and until next time.